Hey guys, so for your Tier 1 class lesson, I have for you a self-regulation scoot game. Now, I absolutely love scoot games. It's a great way to liven up your class lessons, especially if you've been following like the same format all year. And, especially this time of year, right? Because we're kind of getting toward the end of the school year. Kids are getting kind of burnt out. You're maybe seeing some behavior challenges. So this is a fun way to keep kids engaged while learning a new concept. So let's talk about why you should use a scoot game for a class lesson. Well, they are competitive and fun. So there's two ways you can do this, and I'll talk about it a little more in the next slide when I'm kind of talking about how to set up the scoot game. But you can either scoot as a class together using music, or you can make it like a race challenge, which would make it competitive, which some students really thrive in this kind of environment, but others do not. So you want to be mindful of that. Like I said, I'll break that down a little further in a bit. But they're also memorable. So as we know, the more memorable we can make our content, the more likely kiddos are to retain the information and remember it, right? So more memorable, more remembering. That's what I like to think. So, think about your own school experience. If you think back to elementary school, if you can remember that far back, maybe things that stick out are like special events or like a day that you did a cool craft or you had like a guest author come and read to you or something. The memorable moments are the ones that you are going to remember, right? And it's highly engaging. So we don't want the kids to be bored. Self-regulation can be super fun, so we want it to be highly engaging. It also checks for student understanding after a brief introduction. So I'll go into that in a bit, but basically you're going to introduce the concept, and then this is a way that they're going to kind of like self-assess and quiz themselves on how well they know the topic. So I do recommend using this if you've already introduced self-regulation a little bit, or it will be more challenging. But even if the students have a hard time with it, as you go over the answers, then they'll be able to learn what it is by reviewing. So either way works. And I recommend doing this for 3rd to 5th grade is ideal. Now you can do it with some other grades, like a little younger, definitely a little older, but you do want to be mindful of independent readers. So there's a lot of reading involved and kind of fast-paced reading. So you want to make sure that you have confident readers. If you don't have, a class full of confident readers, you can pair them up. So doing like a buddy system, obviously we want to do this not in an obvious way. Maybe talk to the teacher beforehand and say, hey, can you, kind of get the kids into pairs, and maybe they'll travel around and do it as a pair, one, experienced reader and someone who's still working on it. So here is a look at what it looks like in action. So they have the scoot game card, they're reading the cards, and then they're answering the questions on their recording sheet. So when it comes to preparing the game, you're going to print and cut out the task cards. So there are 30 of them. So you're going to print, cut them out, and then place them around the room. And you're going to print one recording sheet per student. So that big sheet you see, one per student. I usually print them full size because then the kids can put it on a clipboard and walk around the room with a clipboard. Or they can just take the paper with them and lay it on desks or whatever. But if you want to save some paper, you could even like do this in quarters and have little smaller recording sheets. They're just circling, they're not really writing, so it can be kind of small. Then you're going to get those cards, the number cards 1 through 30, and place them around the room in numerical order. So I go in like a few minutes, before the lesson's about to start and kind of start prepping the room while the teacher's telling them like, okay, Rachel's here, we're about to do our, counseling lesson. Go around, and then you'll start putting them, on student desks, maybe on the floor, maybe back on near the teacher's desk, just anywhere in the room, but make sure they're in order. And then you're going to give each student the recording sheet and make sure that they have a pencil to use. Now, like I said, you can divide them into groups if necessary. So reasons with this would be necessary is if you have, some struggling readers, you can pair them with a stronger reader. Or if your class is bigger than 30, I hope it's not, but if it is, then you can do pairs. But if you're not doing pairs, then everyone's just going to go to one card. So you're going to assign them a number from one of the task cards to start at. So for example, you would just go around the class and say, okay, I'm going to say your number, remember it, and just start counting. Like Julie, 1, Adrian, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, number all the kids and then say, okay, go now find your number. So then the kids will walk to the desk and they'll say, oh, here's my number, I'm number 10. And they just stand in front of number 10, make sure everyone finds their spot. Now, if you have less than 30 kids, which you likely will, no problem, you would just fill up until that number. So let's say it's 1 through 17 or something. And so they're at their spot, and now we go into playing the game. So how we play the game is you say, okay, begin. So you have two options here. like I was saying before, there's a more competitive option, which I honestly have not done. I usually do the more collaborative option, but the competitive one could be fun. You know your kids the best. So with the competitive option, and now that I'm thinking about it, if you did play this with like a small group where you do know the kids better than a class lesson, maybe the competitive version would be more fun in that setting. But the competitive version is you would just say, okay, go around the room and try to get to as many as you can as fast as you can. But as you can see, that can lead to some chaos. So better if you try that in like a small group. But the collaborative version, which I usually do, is where each student starts in front of their card and you say, okay, go. And then I play some fun music. So I like to play the song Wipeout because it's just instrumental and it's like, you know. And so while that's going, the kids are kind of hyped and they're kind of read the question, answer it on their sheet, and then I pause it and then I say, scoot. And then they all scoot. So what that means is if they're on number 1, they're now going to card 2. If they're on card 2, they're now going to card 3. If they're on card 30, they're now looping back around to go to card 1. So we're going to do this. You're going to give them about a minute to answer the question, and then you're going to scoot, and then they'll all scoot. So it's really fun. I like to walk around the room while they're doing it. You can kind of jump in, help some kids, whatever. And then before you're playing, though, you do want to review self-regulation because all of the cards are asking questions to check for understanding. So if your kids don't have like an established understanding of self-regulation already, then you do want to introduce it. So take a few minutes at the beginning of the session to introduce the self-regulation posters that are included and talk about, in this way, we're talking about self-regulation in terms of temperature. So, heating up. So when they're hot, maybe they're hitting or screaming. But when they're cold, maybe they're tired or yawning. So we're going to talk about the feelings and actions for each of those temperatures. So that's how I like to explain it, self-regulation these days. And then afterwards, so after everyone completes, their whole card is complete. So if they started on number 15, they just ended with number 14, everyone's made it all the way around. Then you return to their desk, you have them return to their desk, and you ask them, okay, let's go over these. Number 1, and I go through them kind of quickly and just have the class kind of answer collectively, What do you think this one is? So, for example, number 16, Corey's smiling because he's happy at school. Which temperature is that? And then they would, and you can have the poster up for reference as well. And they would say like, oh, that's cool. He's feeling cool because he's happy, right? And then you would say, yep, that's correct. Okay, number 17. So it's just kind of a fun way to review it collectively as a class. And if there's a kid who had no clue what any of the answers were, because this is just a fun, like, self-assessment, right? They're not getting graded on it. You can remind them that. But then he's going to learn during that time, right? Like during the review time. So there's 30 task cards included, like I mentioned, with different topics. So 16 of them are a name that emotion or temperature scenario, like the one listed here. 6 of them are which tools should I use scenarios, which is like a coping strategy. And then 8 are true or false. So I hope you love this resource as much as I do. Scoot games are super fun. Please share in the group how your kids like it and what song you use and how it went with your kids. I can't wait to hear all about it.